you, and I too applaud your willingness to come up here and be beat up a little bit, and also to really give us your recommendations for the future. And again, I would echo Senator Kerry that we would very much like your continuing participation and recommendations. One of the record that has emerged from our staff's research is one in which the weight of the industry has been continuously against tightening up restrictions. Now, you've articulated well the reasons why you didn't expect the threat that came, but it's like so many of the arguments we've heard earlier. It's not very persuasive that nobody told us. It's not our job to decide what the threat is. And of course, quite apart from what the regulation that was cited stipulates, of course it's your job. I mean, I would be willing to bet if I could overhear some of your conversations in a bar somewhere that you're not full of praise and confidence for the government's brilliance in handling all of your tax issues and your inspection issues, and what possible reason would you have to think that you don't have to participate in intelligence assessment, threat assessment? The FAA was saying that it was perfectly all right for young Arabs to come onto your airplanes with 4-inch knives. And the industry's attitude was, hey, that's not our business. If the FAA says it's okay, it's got to be okay. What's been missing from a lot of the witnesses that we've had these last 2 days is an application at the leadership level of the common sense test to some of these things. The record that our staff has produced is one of the industry continuously eroding and blocking and defunding initiatives like the First Air Marshal Initiative, the Locked Cockpit Door Initiative, the Single Key Initiative. And one of the things that we've heard constant complaints about from the immigration people is the industry's successful thwarting of their efforts to fix the transit without waiver loophole, which the industry has known has been used by terrorists, has been used heavily by smugglers, and could be relatively easily fixed with the building of secure transit lounges and the kind of measures that most large countries in the world, if not all of them, have. Yet, as I understand it, even today, the industry is whinging and whining because the president suspended this huge loophole. And what I would like to hear how you, you don't necessarily have to respond to my indictment of the pre-9/11 era, but how do you see your roles going forward as an active challenger of the bureaucratic inertia that's inevitably part of many of these government regulatory initiatives? Why do we not have a single instance in our research of the industry saying, we've got to tighten up in screening? We're only paying minimum wage and we have 100% turnover of our people. We should be hiring higher quality people. Why are you letting 4-inch blades aboard our airplanes? We don't have any record of that. And somehow you guys have to change the whole paradigm of the way you approach these safety issues. You've got to be proactive and not a drag on the system, which historically you have been, unless you can provide us evidence that challenges the overwhelming weight of evidence that we have so far.
Commissioner Lehman, if I could begin the response, and then maybe others would like to join me. I understand your frustration, and I understand your comments. As you know from my biography, I hold several major trophies for development of enhanced ground proximity warning, focus systems, so forth, all of which happen to be on the aviation side, were not mandated by the government. quite frankly, if you look at the record, we tested numerous things long before they were mandated. Immediately after TWA 800, we as a company talked with the FAA and said, we are prepared to move forward with some security measures to ramp up because we don't know what caused this. The problem is, and you can make light of it if you like, a citizen does not have the right to search and seize. There are privacy issues. And for example, as the company who was prepared to roll caps out and did roll it out long before any other company, a visit from the Justice Department who told me that if I had more than 3 people of the same ethnic origin in line for additional screening, our system would be shut down as discriminatory.
That is an
Tell me
important
about
point.
common sense.
Well, I agree with you totally. And what I'm suggesting is that your childlike faith in your earlier testimony in the ability of the government to provide you threat warnings should be equally skeptical about. These are all good points. I think you're right.
I hope I did not come across as making excuses. We have a clear role. There are more people in the intelligence community in the United States than we have in our airline, or had in our airline.
That's the problem.
Number two is that when we have an inkling, there is a limit to what we can do without the authority of government. No matter how cooperative we try to be, there are limits. And quite frankly, we had the first CTX machine ever made on our property long before it was certified. We went out and looked at quadrupole, quite frankly used it not in a certified way because of the human factors issues that are in X-ray screening. A number of us were advocating we needed research and development in systems that were red light, green light as opposed to interpretive. We went out and worked with the FAA to put those into practice. We couldn't use them as official systems because they're not approved systems, but we used them in San Diego to demonstrate their effectiveness, but could not get funding for further research in those types of technologies. So again, all of us know that I don't think there's anybody at the table, I know them all quite well, that doesn't do a lot of self-examination. But I think it is a bit unfair that we did not go the extra mile.
Commissioner Lehman, I'd like to add.
Let me just to follow on to Ed's point that, Ed, you were talking really CAPS 1 in a pre-9/11 environment. And I think coming back to what Senator Kerry was saying earlier, some of this does defy common sense. In a post-9/11 environment, we had situations where our crew members were uncomfortable with passengers on board the airplane. They hauled them off the airplane, and I think there's 10 or 11 of them. And today we're being sued by the DOT over each one of those cases.
That's something we should definitely follow up on, because if that DOT is still pursuing that policy, that we will get involed.
I think last month United was actually fined. We should follow up for you on that
Is
as well.
that right? Could you get us the
We'll get you
data?
that information.
We'd be
And-
happy to take up your cause.
Despite that kind of situation that does, I think, lack some common sense, we continue, and I suspect United is the same way, to advocate to our crew members. If anyone's on the airplane that makes you uncomfortable or in any way you think compromises safety, get them off the airplane. The captain is the in-flight security coordinator for every flight and is the final authority on everything. So despite some of the stuff that we deal with, we do make a lot of common sense decisions and give our crew members a lot of common sense advice. And we tell them, you don't worry about lawsuits and that kind of stuff. We'll take care of that.
Yeah, we back them up on their decisions.
By the way, to follow up on that, we put a great deal of faith and have gotten a great deal of benefit in the Navy, for instance, out of red teams. And we just heard testimony this morning that there is a continuing emphasis, although this might be a little controversial, on using the red teams in FAA again. Do you get direct access to these red team reports when they come through, when they send a team of spec ops type people through your security system and find big holes in it. Do you hear about that directly or not?
There's a lot of data about the red teams. Initially, we did not. Under General Canavan's leadership, we did in the summer of 2001. There was a review of the red team audits. Again, I can't speak of industry, but I certainly can tell you that the audits that were conducted at American actually showed that we were quite effective with one error in a particular city. There were 3 audits that I'm familiar with that we did receive in the summer of 2001 from the red team. But General Canavan invited all of the security directors, my subordinate, went to the session, and they reviewed some of the red team audits and provided us data on airline-specific data.
But not since?
I don't know. Again, I changed jobs in 2002. I haven't seen any since 2002. I certainly can get the data from our security folks.
Would you agree you ought to get them on a regular
Absolutely.
basis?
Absolutely.
That's good. We'd appreciate it if you'd give us a follow-up date on that.
Mr. Lehman, just a thought on the red teams. There's a difference between the red teams and the regulators who audit. The red teams are supposed to find vulnerabilities in the system. And while I'm not disagreeing with Mr. Ahern, there are things that they find that really do need to be kept. We need to know the solution. But transmitting vulnerabilities to large volumes of people does not always serve the best interest.
How about just like the people at your table here?
If we do that, there are 195 carriers in the United States. That would be 2 per carrier. That's 400 people. One of the great problems we've had with security is that almost any procedure we implement is leaked and gets vetted in the media. And quite frankly, in some of the discussion we have had, there are things that we shouldn't know because they compromise the ability to gather the information. So I think
but I
that
think that's
balance
a tiny,
is,
I understand your point, but I think it's largely inapplicable because many of the things that the hijackers found in as they did their intel work and casing their own red teaming before they decided which airports to hit and so forth, had already been identified in red team reports and had not been passed on to you. Wouldn't you have rather known about those vulnerabilities directly, even if other people learned about them too, because the terrorists are going to find out about them anyway, likely?
I would want to know about the vulnerabilities, and I would want the ability and the power to deal with them. But again, there are some limits.
Could I get your each of your airlines' views on how we solve this transit without visa issue?
Both Ed and I have left United in the last year, over a year ago, so hard for me to speak for current situation. Ed might want to give you a general overview of what was going on in the past.
But now we'll get a better answer from both of you, so tell us.
I think the TSA acted appropriately. I don't work for United anymore, so I would say that there are vulnerabilities. We have identified them. We did offer, as I understand, United offered some alternatives. Building terminals takes time. When there's a threat, you want to deal with it in some way in the short term, and then some of the solutions I see sound like wonderful ideas, but they don't work for 7 years. So
Yes, but I point out that that was the ATA's argument 28 years ago when this temporary transit without visa was put in. Mr.
Yeah, I'll just add a comment that in many of our locations, we already have a situation where we can control the individual. That doesn't mean that we have in all our international gateways, and that's certainly an issue that we would have to address. But I think from an operational standpoint, the key to this process is making sure that as the individual comes into the country, they stay in a separate area, and then they leave the country in a separate area as well. And we already have that in place in many of our larger cities. So I think that that's the number one thing that needs to get done. And then, again, we'll work with the intelligence community to decide what else needs to get done.
I think the key is you need to remain in control of the passenger throughout the journey.
Yeah, and, I mean, in other countries, they don't officially enter the country because there's a secure customs and immigration area, transit lounge that they stay in. What has not worked is the airline saying, trust us, we'll have somebody hold the person's hand for 24 hours while they go in and have a dinner in Harlem. Doesn't work.